Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. We're so glad you guys could join us today. We're going to give everyone just a few minutes to settle in before we get started, and we will get started at the top of the hour. For those just joining, we'll give a few minutes for everyone to settle in, and we will get started, like I said, at the top of the hour. Okay, well, we're at the top of the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Just a few housekeeping items before we kind of dig into today's content. This is a Microsoft Teams webinar, so for all attendees, you all are currently muted. We encourage you to use the chat feature throughout the session to ask any questions or share any comments. We'll also leave time at the end of the session for a Q&A, so feel free to drop questions as they come up. And this session is being recorded, and we'll be sending you a follow-up email with the recording and additional resources after the webinar. So with that, Eddie, I think we can go ahead and get started.
Sounds great.
Awesome. So again, thank you all so much for joining today. For those that have tuned in before, welcome back. And for those that are new, welcome. My name is Meredith Laro, and I serve as the Director of Compliance for Clarity Benefit Solutions. And of course, I'm joined today by Eddie Larn, our Senior Vice President of Sales. For today's session, we're tracking a hot compliance topic, letters of medical necessity. We're going to cover what they are, why they're on the rise, what's valid, really what's risky, and how to avoid compliance risks.
Yeah, and I think this is great timing and very relevant today in the employee benefit space, Meredith. I mean, we've seen an explosion of online LMN or letter of medical necessity providers. And while they definitely make life easier for participants, I think they can create some big headaches for employers and TPAs if the documentation is not up to IRS standards, which of course is something that Meredith is going to help walk us through today. So thank you again for joining. Hope today's session is helpful and beneficial for you.
Perfect. All right. So let's really start at the foundation. What exactly is a letter of medical necessity? And we typically refer to it as an LMN. And why do you need one? Why would a participant need one? So a letter of medical necessity, or an LMN, is a formal document written by a healthcare provider explaining why a specific treatment, service, or item is medically necessary to treat a condition. And typically, the letter is valid for a 6-month period. You usually need an LMN when an insurance company or a benefit program like an FSA or HSA won't automatically cover something, or it's not obviously medical. These are often called dual purpose expenses. So LMNs establish that a procedure or product is medically required and not just optional for general wellness related services.
Yeah, and I think a quick example just to start us off, and we'll talk about multiple different types of examples as we go through today's discussion. But one that comes up often is a chiropractor's note that says orthotics prescribed to correct foot alignment. And that would be something that is valid. But if the letter says it's for comfort, that claim is not going to pass a substantiation review. So just the wording, slight changes in wording actually can make a big difference when it comes to the IRS or the Department of Labor looking into these types of claims.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Eddie. I think the important thing here is the distinction between treatment and general wellness. And that is critical when it comes to covering dual purpose expenses and why letters of medical necessity are key in that regard. So now that we've covered what an element is, let's kind of take a step back and ground this in what the IRS actually considers medical care. We use Section 213D of the tax code to really define, it's the gold standard of what medical care is. And medical care includes expenses tied to diagnosing, treating, or preventing disease or anything that affects a structure or function of the body.
Right. And I think that also includes things that people expect, right? Like dental or
Mhm.
vision care, some over the counter items. But there's also other items there like transportation if it's required for treatment. So whether it's, a flight out to the Cleveland Clinic for some specialized care, or the person needs, a type of ambulance or vehicle to help them get to their place of care, those things can be covered as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I guess that's where things kind of get tricky is how the IRS draws that line. The expense has to have a clear medical purpose. It needs to treat or prevent a specific condition.
Yep. And I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up. I mean, just because something is good for you doesn't mean it qualifies. So I think the obvious one there, and I know we'll talk about this a little bit later because it's something that comes up so often, is physical activity. So, like a gym membership is good for you and does make you healthier. It's proven, but it doesn't necessarily mean it qualifies unless you have, some sort of condition or a provider can give you that letter of medical necessity for a specific reason.
Yeah, exactly. General wellness items, like to your point, Eddie, gym memberships, vitamins, or supplements don't qualify unless there's a diagnosed condition and a provider has documented that need.
Yep. And then, of course, there's like cosmetic procedures, right? Which are usually excluded unless they're tied to something like an injury or a medical condition. So, this is an example we give all the time: Botox. You can get Botox specifically for cosmetic reasons, which is very common, but also Botox can be done for real, true medical reasons. So, if you have like a muscle in your face that is twitching or something like that, you can get a Botox injection to help stabilize that, and that would be something that's legitimate. So here you have an example of something that is very often used just for cosmetic, but there are scenarios where it actually could be legit under a letter of medical necessity.
That's exactly right. And so when you're dealing with those gray area dual purpose expenses, that's exactly where an LMN becomes critical to prove medical necessity.
So I guess the big question is, Meredith, why are we seeing so many more LMNs now? I mean, you and I have been working together in the FSA, HSA space for the past 15 years, and it just seems like in the last year or two, it's just like we led off with, it just kind of has exploded with the amount of letter of medical necessities that are, coming through. And you, of course, as our director of compliance, are heavily involved on the claims side of things. I mean, what do you think you're seeing, or what are the reasons behind
Yeah,
this surge?
yeah, we've seen a massive increase in the LMN space. So I think when we take a step back, there's really three main drivers behind it. First is access. I think since COVID, telehealth platforms have made it incredibly easy and prevalent to request and receive an LMN, sometimes right at checkout when someone is buying a product.
Yeah, it's almost like built into the buying experience now. It's just part of the process.
Yeah, exactly. And second, it comes down to cost. Participants are getting smarter and more savvy about using their HSA and FSA dollars. When we're talking about thousands of dollars in tax savings, people are really starting to pay attention.
Yeah, and looking for ways to stretch those dollars too, in today's environment, we have inflation, job security, every dollar counts. And I also think this is getting very popular, especially with a product like an FSA, which has a use it or lose it or a limited rollover. You get to the end of the year and you've got $1,000 or $1,500 left, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to buy $1,000 worth of sunscreen and band-aids. Well, what if there was a way to get a Peloton or to get, something else that could bring value to your everyday life, and you don't forfeit your funds. I think that is something else that is kind of providing an opportunity for growth.
Yeah, and I think that really ties into the third pillar or the third driver, which is expansion. IRS guidance, when you look at 213D, we're seeing that it's going to allow for more dual purpose items to qualify, as long as there's proper documentation and a clear medical need for those products or procedures.
Yep. Things like supplements, alternative treatments, even higher end products are being considered. I mean, I've seen things, we'll talk about some of our partners in a little bit, but like special, like bed sheets or those red light masks, like things like that, that are more higher end. I mean, 5 years ago, I never would have thought of things like that being eligible with a letter of medical necessity. So it is kind of interesting to see how it's changing.
We've seen some crazy things come across our desk, like cat litter boxes to alleviate allergies. So, we're getting some real interesting ones coming across here. But really, the bottom line from all of this is participants want more flexibility, and elements are becoming that tool that helps make that possible. So, let's take a pulse here. How many of you on this call have seen LMNs coming from online or telehealth sources? And you should get a pop-up in the meeting to go ahead and submit your answer.
Yeah, and certainly no right or wrong answer here. This is just a poll just to see what you're seeing in the market and with your employees or with your clients. And if you haven't seen kind of an increase in these online LMNs in your claims queue this year, you probably will soon. I mean, here at Clarity, we've seen a 40% uptick in claims tied to an online LMN provider just in this year alone. And I mean, we're only in April, so
Yeah.
it's definitely catching on. But with that being said, I'll give everyone, 10, 20 seconds to go ahead and think about this answer and answer here in the widget, and then we can keep moving along.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see.
So far, 74% say none yet.
Okay, interesting. Well, if you, like Eddie
Yeah,
said, if you haven't heard about them, you will, because they are very much on the rise, very popular. So I appreciate those responses, guys. Do you think we're ready to move to the next slide, Eddie?
I think so. Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Cool. So with that increase in demand, for those that have heard of it, for those that maybe haven't, there is a surge in these. We've again seen a surge in online LMN services offering quick approvals, and on the surface they sound awesome. They're fast, they're easy, they're convenient for participants.
Yeah, and this is always where we see compliance risks come in, right? Whenever something surges in popularity, more and more folks are utilizing it. More and more companies are coming out with these solutions. That's where the compliance risks come in. So a lot of these services do rely on templated language instead of, patient-specific details. And that is definitely a huge flag, as Meredith, I'm sure you would tell us, because
Mhm.
substantiation requires individualized justification. It can't be just that templated explanation. So Meredith and her team actually reviewed one set of 50 claims this year, and all had LMNs from the exact same online provider, and each letter was word for word identical. So auditors immediately flag things like that.
Yeah, and we're seeing critical items missing from some of these elements, including physician credentials, no clear diagnosis, no defined treatment duration, and not to mention telemedicine requirements for qualified clinical patient assessments, which are often providing these letters vary state by state. So it's important that these LMNs are following state required regulations as well.
And I have to imagine all of those elements you just mentioned right there, those data points, those are probably the core things that auditors are looking for.
I would almost guarantee it, yes. And on top of that, I mean, these providers don't often have a full picture of the participant's medical history or the specific plan or state requirements, as I mentioned a little bit ago. So while they make it easy to get a document, that document may not actually hold up once it's reviewed.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's just so important to not just accept LMNs at face value, but to actually make sure they meet these right standards. Because otherwise, you could face tax consequences.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So here's a real example, right? We always like to tell you the rules, the compliance risks, and then provide some real world examples throughout the presentation. So we saw one employer saw a wave of claims reverse after an audit, and every LMN came from the same telehealth provider.
Right, right. And the kicker is that none of these letters had an actual diagnosis. They were just recommended for wellness. So once they added plan level language requiring credential verification, the denials dropped by half. So again, you can't just have it be that boilerplate recommended for wellness. I mean, I would love to have my monthly Peloton subscription covered by my HSA just because it's healthy for you. But like we said, you have to have those actual credential verification. Make sure this is a legitimate provider providing this LMN with actual reasoning behind it.
Exactly. And I think that's just one example of how a small process update or a tweak in language can really close a major compliance gap.
All right, so now I think it's important to pause here and say or reiterate that LMNs themselves are absolutely not a bad thing. So I hope that's not coming off this way as we educate you on LMNs. That's certainly not the intention.
Definitely not. When they're done correctly, we've seen them and they're actually a really powerful tool.
Yeah, I mean, for participants, they can open up access, more things can be covered. They're able to use their pre-tax dollars more effectively and more for their own, personal needs. So this means lower out-of-pocket costs, access to more personalized care options, and it also gives employees more support if a claim is questioned or denied.
That's exactly right. And from the employer side, there's value too. There's no direct cost to the employer, but you often see increased participation when participants have better access to care or better healthy outcomes and higher contributions. And that translates into real savings, about 7.65% in payroll tax savings for every dollar contributed.
Yeah. So the goal here is certainly not to discourage letters of medical necessity. It's just to be sure that they're being done the right way and in a way that everyone benefits. I mean, selfishly, as the head of sales at Clarity, I want more people to enroll in their FSA and their HSA, and I want them to contribute more money and be able to use the funds for more things. But it's also our job as the FSA or HSA administrator to make sure that things are done in a compliant way. And that's really our job and what our clients pay us for. We want to keep our plans compliant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. And so I want to take a second to just talk about this. I'm really proud to say that this is where Clarity has really taken a thoughtful approach with balancing access with that ever important compliance component as well.
Yeah, so as you can see here on this slide, we've partnered with two companies. One is called TrueMed, the other is Healthy Commerce, who you might know as the name behind FSA Store and HSAstore.com. And these two partners really make it easier for participants to actually use their HSA and FSA funds and to do so in a compliant way. Through these partnerships, participants can shop for a wide range of eligible products, a lot of which we've mentioned or teased on today's call. And they're guided through the process in a compliant way. And that's what to me is really exciting is that both of these platforms now offer ways for participants to obtain letters of medical necessity when it is appropriate.
Yeah, and I think this is really just opens the door to use. It opens the door to even more products, and it's done in a compliant way. Things like exercise equipment, Pelotons, specialty sleep aids, and other dual purpose items. This gives them the path to a compliant way to obtain and purchase those items.
Right, right. And again, the key difference here is how it's done. These are not generic one size fits all letters like we talked about earlier when we looked at those 50 letters in a sample. These partners are structured to align with these compliance requirements. So the documentation is valid, it's defensible, it's tied to an actual medical need, which, like Meredith mentioned earlier, is just so important in making this compliant. So employees are actually paired with a doctor through a virtual visit. that doctor will diagnose the participant and provide that LMN if they do in fact meet the requirements. So I actually got to see a demo of someone interacting, with the doctor through one of these platforms, through a virtual visit, and they walked away with a LMN. It's really, really cool, very user friendly.
Yeah, I actually went through it myself and it was
There you
very
go.
fast, very, very compliant from a compliance perspective. I'm like, okay, this is the right way to do it. So, I mean, I think it was very easy to gain access and to get that element, if
Yeah.
in fact you qualify. So,
Yep. And we didn't pick these partners randomly. I mean, there's probably hundreds of them out there. So we at Clarity vetted multiple solutions and made sure that they meet the standards that we expect and that our clients and our broker partners expect of us.
yeah, and so ultimately this strikes a healthy a balance, right, between a better participant experience while still protecting employers and plans from compliance risk. Now, I just wanted to take a step back and focus the next big area on alignment. So, the company a company's plan documents and summary plan descriptions must mirror what a third party is actually doing in practice.
Yeah, I recall we took over one account and we've seen where the plans where the SPD says one thing about LMNs and how they're approved and what's required, but the TPA is using an entirely different checklist there. So I think that is where you do see some reversals start to happen, and that's not a great experience for the employee, and especially not if HR has to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if you've been to my webinars before, I'm going to recommend it again, an annual review of your compliance checklist, so to speak, to make sure definitions, processes, and retention rules all line up, and that what it says in the plan document is what the third party is actually doing is going to help fill in any compliance gaps and stop problem areas from happening to begin with.
Yeah, that's where I'm really happy with TrueMed and Healthy Commerce, and how we audited multiple TPAs. I mean, they've got a really strong reputation in the market for being compliant while also being very user friendly.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So, just to give you some guidance, here's a quick checklist that you can take back to your team. And these are really the core items that every element process should include, every letter should include. That the physician credentials are verified, that diagnosis and treatment duration is stated outright, condition-specific justification has been provided, copy of the letter is retained with the claims letter, and participant education provided on an annual basis.
Yeah, and if you're working with a different TPA that's not Clarity, I mean, please feel free to share this list with them. I mean, having both sides check the same boxes will avoid most disputes and appeals and rejections. We're not gatekeeping this data, this information. I highly encourage anyone who has an FSA or an HSA and is starting to see these LMNs come in to reference
Mhm.
this checklist.
Absolutely. So really, if you remember nothing else from the content today, remember these top LMN mistakes. We're often seeing missing physician signature or credentials, generic template with LMN wording that is not patient specific, and really mismatch between the plan rules and what the TPA is actually doing.
Yeah, and out of these, the most common is that templated LMN, like we talked about earlier. We have seen hundreds say recommended for better health, which sounds great, but that phrase alone has cost employers thousands in reversals. So definitely keep an eye out for that one in particular.
Yeah, and again, mostly comes down to a small wording tweak, or simply requiring a physician's name and licensure number, and that really can make all the difference in terms of compliance risk and standing up in the event of a claim audit. So really to wrap up the session before we dive into some Q&A, education alignment and documentation are always going to be your best defenses. Without proper guidance and education, employees don't realize how powerful an LMN actually is, and they end up leaving money and benefits on the table. Done right, LMNs are a powerful tool to unlock maximum benefits and provide better health outcomes for employees and ultimately capitalize on tax savings on both the individual and the employer levels.
And remember, just to reiterate, this is not about making it harder for participants. That is certainly not the idea or the motivation behind any of this. It's more about making sure that legitimate claims get through cleanly and stand up to an audit. That's the ultimate goal here is, again, to protect the employer, protect the employee, and everyone's happy.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll open it up for a few minutes for any questions. I don't see any in the Q&A so far. Is Clarity, oh, here's a question in the chat. Is TrueMed free for our Clarity clients?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
No added cost.
No, I mean, if the participant purchases something through TrueMed, obviously they would be paying using their FSA or HSA dollars, but it is a partnership that we are actively in, and it will not cost clients or brokers anything to participate in that partnership.
Yeah, and you can find it right on the homepage of our website. I think it's under the resources or solutions tab. And you can find the link right to TrueMed. I encourage you to check it out. Check out some of the items that they sell there with a letter of medical necessity. Like I said earlier, you will be surprised at some of the items that are on there.
So what steps do you take to verify provider information? So when we get a letter of medical necessity, there should be the provider's name, their license number. And so if it comes to that, we will do additional research outside of that if something doesn't seem to add up. But typically, if we have their name, their license number, their address, that would be a defensible document in terms of validating that letter of medical necessity on top of all the other things, right? We need to have a clear foundation for what is being prescribed and the medical condition around it, as well as the duration and length of treatment and how long this item or service is being prescribed for. How will an employer know when an LMN is submitted? I'm not sure an employer would necessarily need to know that. So our team knows when services are dual purpose or our services would require an LMN. If we don't receive that LMN with the claim submission or when we're adjudicating card transactions, we will ask the participant, we'll deny the claim and ask them to resubmit with the LMN. Once we have an LMN that is approved, we will mark that participant's account accordingly, that there is an LMN on file, the length of the LMN, and what that LMN is for. But that is for, us in a compliant manner processing those claims. I don't think it's something that we necessarily publish to employers.
Yeah, I agree with that response, Meredith. I think a lot of times when someone has a claim denied and they don't necessarily understand why, even though we provide, reason for denial, they oftentimes go to HR and say, hey, what do I need to do to get this approved? So I think that's more the scenario where it could pop up. And of course, HR wants to make sure it's eligible as well.
Yeah. How can we download the LMN checklist template? If it's not downloading from the screen, I will provide that after the session. What's your process where an LMN is deemed insufficient after a claim has already been approved? How do you explain that to a participant? Typically, we would not approve a claim without a sufficient LMN. So this is not something that comes up often. If there was an audit or an additional claim determination was made after the claim was approved, we would certainly have a letter that goes out to the participant that explains what an LMN is, why it's required, and why that is needed for the specific type of service or product that the person submitted for. But that's not a common occurrence. We typically would not approve a claim without a sufficient LMN. Do you direct the employees to TrueMed? Eddie, do you want to?
Yeah, I would say that if an employee calls in and asks Clarity customer service, if they can buy a Peloton, yes, we're going to direct them to TrueMed and say, well, maybe, it depends. And we'll explain letter of medical necessity to them. Also, as our sales and service teams provide education, whether it's during open enrollment or throughout the course of the year, we will absolutely be referencing TrueMed and Healthy Commerce. We've been partners with Healthy Commerce for many years, and it is a standard part of our education in. They've got a great eligibility search tool, a great marketplace. We've got a single sign-on with them, where your card is right available in their portal. So TrueMed is more of a recent partnership, and the answer is yes, we will be directing them to both solutions, both through education and when employees ask how they can spend their funds.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we see a big increase at the end of the year, right? Especially for FSAs, people get very anxious about the use it or lose it or limited rollover. So we are seeing when we look kind of at the expensive like transactions, right? We do see a big increase in these online e-commerce sites at the end of the year. So it definitely is a good talking point to help individuals access care and access services that will help them ultimately with potentially diagnosed issues. Can you clarify whether an LMN or an MD documentation would be required for purchase of FSA HSA eligible products, supplies, or services?
I think the answer's well, do you want to take it or do you want me to give my initial thoughts and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong?
Yeah, go ahead. And I felt, yes, go right ahead.
Yeah, I think the answer is it depends. It depends on what you're purchasing. So if you're purchasing something like sunscreen or Band-Aids or first aid kit or Advil, those are already FSA and HSA eligible under IRS 213D eligible expenses. So no additional documentation would be needed in that scenario. The debit card is smart enough. It knows what is eligible and it knows a Coca-Cola is not eligible.
Mhm.
Same thing if swiped at a doctor's office for a copay, for example, that's auto approved, no additional documentation later. I think the LMN comes more into play when something is either not on the IRS 213D eligible expense list at all, or it's on there with that asterisk that says yes if accompanied by an LMN. So I think the answer is it kind of depends on what the product or what the supply is. Meredith, I'll
Yeah,
let you
that's
give
exactly right.
the correct answer there if
Yeah.
I'm on the right track.
We are definitely not asking for LMNs for everything, right? There is a definition under 213D. If something doesn't meet that definition, then we're probably going to be asking for an LMN. Things like massage, right? We talked at the top of the hour, we talked about general wellness, right? Well, a massage is for general wellness. It's very relaxing. It feels good, but it can also be used to treat chronic pain. So when we have something that's dual purpose, that's when an LMN comes in and says you need to be diagnosed with a legitimate medical condition in order to enjoy a massage using your FSA or HSA dollars. All right, so if we didn't get to your questions, we are at the top of the half hour. We always reply to any questions that were unanswered in the chat after the call. So I wanted to thank you all for your time today and for your thoughtful questions. Again, if we were not able to get to yours, we will follow up individually after this webinar. We'll be sending a follow-up email with a few helpful resources that will include the LMN checklist, a resource guide, a recording of this webinar, and a copy of all the slides, and we'll follow up separately with your SHRM credit information.
Yeah, really appreciate everyone taking the time in the middle of the day today to join us. Really hope this gave you some practical takeaways. And of course, Meredith, thank you for sharing your expertise. We greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for your time. We'll see you later.